Me now. Hi, Michelle.
Hello.
I can hear and see the SkyTrain behind you there. Where are you?
Yeah, so we are at the Metro Town SkyTrain station on the platform, one of the only places where things are kind of moving and working as they normally would. We're right next to the Metro Town bus loop, and you can see it's an absolute ghost town. There is nobody there. There are no buses
Right.
there. So we actually came here to talk to people because if you go to a bus stop to try to talk to someone today, hopefully nobody is there because there are no buses coming.
Yes, and perhaps hopefully they have the option of hopping onto a SkyTrain, and that's going to be to take them to their destination. Have you been able to speak with anybody there?
Yeah, we've been talking to people. We heard of some people early this morning who maybe took a little news break over the weekend, did not realize the strike was starting, so set out about their day sitting at a bus stop until someone walking by said, "Hey, just so you know, you're going to be waiting a while because that bus is not going to come." Talking to another woman today who was trying to get to Douglas College, she said she actually does have a car, but she was worried about the parking situation given that so many people were going to be attempting to get to work via their car because transit isn't running. And, lots of people, if you can't walk or bike, if you can't afford to cab or take an Uber, which is going to be really expensive today, people are struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michelle, I'll ask you about the labor dispute in a moment. But first, you mentioned the buses, of course. What services are stopped and what are still running?
Yeah, so everything operated by Coast Mountain Bus Company, it's actually easier to list what is running today. So West Coast Express, Handy Dart, SkyTrain, as you can see right here, they're actually all listed up on this sign. No bus and C-bus services due to ongoing job action at CMBC by CUPE 4500. SkyTrain, Expo Canada Line, Millennium Line, West Coast Express, and Handy Dart service not expected to be impacted. You're going to hear a SkyTrain coming in here. But there has been a little bit of confusion today. That might be a little loud for you. That's the SkyTrain next to us. Because there was talk that SkyTrain workers might actually not cross the picket line. Now, TransLink clarified, said that there can only be picket lines at CBus and at Coast Mountain Bus Service. So right now SkyTrain is running, but that's also caused a little bit of confusion for people here who say, this is running now, but I'm a little bit worried about my commute home. Is this going to be running? For now, everything operating as normal.
I know it sounds loud, but I'm sure for some people it's music to their ears right now to hear those SkyTrains coming.
Absolutely.
And so the job action, Michelle, tell us more about it and what this dispute is about.
Yeah, there's a lot of things here, but the main sticking point is a 25% wage increase over several years that the workers want. And the company saying that is unreasonable, that their negotiating position is in line with other collective agreements from similar unions. The workers are calling the company inflexible. So, we were waiting until that 3 a.m. mark to see whether they were going to find a last minute deal. Obviously, that didn't happen. And so we're in a holding pattern for 2 days now.
Okay, and what's the likelihood it will go past 2 days?
You know what? We don't know. There is an update from the union coming in 2 hours at 2 p.m. So we'll be watching that. We'll bring you that as well. But right now, it's kind of how long could this go on? How is this going to affect people who need to get to school, get to work, get to those appointments? Your guess is as good as mine, Michelle.
Yeah, a lot of questions for sure. And we'll look to see how the afternoon commute develops as well. Michelle, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's CBC reporter Michelle Gasub joining us from the Metrotown SkyTrain station. It's 12:11 now, 1:11 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today. Yes, and you've been getting in touch with us as well to tell us how the bus strike has affected your plans today. Adam wrote us, "I got up at 6 o'clock this morning to drive my eldest son to his job at a cabinetry shop in South Vancouver. It wasn't convenient, but I was happy to lend a hand." And Kelly writes, "Every day I take public transit to get to work and to visit my mother. With a strike happening today, I'll have to stay local to do my shopping, and my mother will have to do all the driving for me." You can write us and send us your emails, bctoday@cbc.ca. And yes, the next 2 days are going to be challenging for people who rely on the bus to get to work. We spoke with these commuters at the commercial Broadway SkyTrain station this morning.
Just got back from vacation from India on Saturday. So yesterday I was just checking my emails. I work with Vancouver Coastal Health, so then I saw a memo saying there's a strike. I was quite surprised, but then because I'm, back for the first day, I just didn't want to miss work, which is why I was so determined. I should have just called in sick. It's really bad.
There's no lineup, there's no bus, people are talking about it, and apparently there's a strike, which I'm totally in support of. As inconvenient as it is, it's great that we have labor representation in public transportation. I'll have to make other arrangements. It's going to be a bit of a headache, but that's the way of the world.
I mean, it's definitely inconvenient. I don't know. I mean, I don't know all the details of like why this is happening or what they need to get service back on, so I'm not ready to like cast judgment on that. But personally, it's very inconvenient. I have no way of getting to work, so we'll see what happens.
Transit users can expect an update from the union today. They're holding a news conference, as you heard from Michelle Gusub, at 2 o'clock Pacific time. More on CBC throughout the day. On to the big news from Ottawa today. The federal government has announced a 2-year cap on international student permits. There has been growing concern over the growing number of international students and the impact they're having on the tight housing market. And so today, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Minister Mark Miller announced a cap effectively reducing study permits for this year by 35% from last year.
Be absolutely clear, these measures are not against individual international students. They are to ensure that as future students arrive in Canada, they receive the quality of education that they signed up for and the hope that they were provided in their home countries. It would be a disservice to welcome international students in Canada knowing not all of them are getting the resources they need to succeed in Canada and having them return home disillusioned and disappointed in Canada's education system.
Miller calls it a blunt measure aimed at protecting a system that is open to abuse, and that the measures are not against international students. We're asking you on the open line, what will be the impact of this temporary limit on international students for 2 years? If you are an international student yourself, what's been your experience? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, you can reach us at bctoday@cbc.ca. We'll take your questions in a few minutes, but first I'm joined by BC's Minister of Post-Secondary Education and Future Skills, Selena Robinson. Good afternoon, Minister.
Good afternoon, Michelle.
Thank you for joining us. The Immigration Minister, Mark Miller, said he has had discussions with BC on this. Do you support this cap?
Yeah, well, I've been in conversation with Minister Miller over the last number of months as we were seeing the number of international students continue to climb post-COVID, and recognize that that we were hearing more stories of students not getting the services that they were promised, of hearing about bad actors who are taking advantage of international education students, and seeing a mismatch between the programs that are being offered and the skill sets that are required here in British Columbia. So we've been working on a suite of actions that I'll have more to say about next week. But in talking with Minister Miller and his commitment to using his blunt tool that he has, but also working with the tools that we have to make sure that in tandem we can address some of the challenges that we've been hearing that international students have been having here in British Columbia.
When you talk about those bad actors, the Minister Miller referred to these as well. He called them unscrupulous institutions, referring to them as sort of diploma puppy mills. How would you describe these institutions, and how rampant are they in BC?
Well, we have, several hundred, well over 250 private post-secondaries here in British Columbia. And they've been opening up relatively quickly, certainly over the last number of years. And as we've, been hearing stories, I'm appalled at some of the choices that some of these operators are making. So, for example, stories of recruiters back in the home country, often India, those are the ones that I've been hearing, that are making all of these, I think, egregious promises about, you'll get this kind of housing and you'll have in-class instruction and you just need to do this and this is how much it's going to cost. And they do all the right things. The student does all the right things and they arrive and there is no housing, there are no supports. And in fact, I've heard cases where there is no classroom. They show up at an address only to learn that all classes are offered online. And so it makes no sense for them to be here. And that to me is absolutely egregious.
You've heard these stories, but what kind of oversight or penalties have these institutions faced?
So one of the challenges we have is that when we hear these stories, we've asked people to identify the institution so that we could take action. And they're reluctant to do so because then they worry that it's going to affect their status here in Canada. So their family spent all of this money to get here. And then if they complain, the risk of their education, the risk of their visa, losing their visa is too much for them. And so it becomes really challenging for us to take any action. And so that's the work that we've been doing over the last number of months, is to really bring some changes to that system so that there's more oversight on our part as a government, but also that we are working together with the federal government to make sure that the student visas are applied appropriately where there's better accountability. And so we're going to be requiring much more accountability by these private institutions.
And will that accountability come at the outset then, rather than waiting for complaints from students who may not want to identify? Will that be at the establishment stage?
Exactly. So that's really where we're going to be focusing our efforts, making sure that we're increasing the quality so that everyone, so that there's a higher quality of education, increasing those standards, making sure that there's a labor market match. Like, we know here in British Columbia that we need people working in our healthcare system. We need LPNs, and we also need early childhood educators. We need construction workers. Like, we need people to come and to participate in our economy, to provide the services that we need. We need more people who have these skill sets. We're prepared to train them, but we need to make sure that there's a better match between the education being offered and what is needed here in British Columbia. So that's also going to be part of our work.
And that's just it, isn't it? Because on the other hand, Canada, BC needs more workers and more students. But at the same time, are you concerned that these caps, these new regulations, blame international students that they're taking the brunt of these policy failures?
Exactly. Well, the students are certainly being hurt, and that's not good. It's not good for the students, and it's not good for our reputation. We have excellent institutions. We have excellent institutions that do right by international students. So we want to make sure that we're preserving that. While we're addressing the bad actors, while we're making sure that those who are taking advantage of these students, that they're the ones that we impact on their ability to hurt students. And so we're using the tools that are within our realm as a provincial government, and we're doing that in tandem with the federal government. We had a very positive discussion with Minister Miller on Friday around how we're going to be bringing about some changes to the system that provides him with some comfort so that we can make sure that it's a robust system that really puts the needs of these international students at the forefront.
What will be the impact on the public universities and colleges that are operating credibly? What will be the impact on their revenue streams?
So, I mean, really, our publics, they're good actors. They have supports for students. They have, programs that are monitored very closely. And so, those sorts of issues aren't at play here. But we're also going to be working with our public post-secondaries to make sure that there's a really good labor market match. That's one of the areas where we're going to be focusing our efforts, and making sure, again, that students have really good experiences here, that they say, they get a quality education, one that we can all be proud of, one where they say, you know what, I want to make my life here in Canada. Or if they choose to not make their life here in Canada, they can go home and say they had a really good experience here in Canada, and they want to have, a relationship with us here as part of a global network.
And finally, before I let you go, will their funding, will they be lacking in revenue? And will that affect, programming for all students? And, are you looking at perhaps revisiting the kind of government funding that's provided to these institutions?
Well, we always review government funding, making sure that the resources are there to provide a robust education that works for students that works for our economy. And so that conversation is always an ongoing one.
But in light
And
of
again,
this,
but in light of this, at this point, we're doing the analysis. We don't expect any major challenges to arise, and we're going to continue to work with our public post-secondaries to make sure that they're delivering programs, and they're delivering it in ways that really meet the needs of international students here in British Columbia.
Minister Robinson, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Selena Robinson is BC's Minister of Post-Secondary Education and Future Skills. We are asking you, what will be the impact of this temporary limit on international students in Canada for 2 years? If you're an international student yourself, what's been your experience? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. On your cell phone, you can hit us up at pound 690. You can also email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. We have reached now an expert on migration policy to help us parse through the announcement and the issues. Ali Bagat is an assistant professor of race and equity at Simon Fraser University's School of Public Policy. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
What's your reaction to this announcement?
Yeah, I mean, I think my reaction to this is fairly mixed. I do understand the federal government's desire to cap bad actors that are acting, basically for profit and turning a massive profit on international students that face all sorts of issues when they come to Canada, including labor issues, housing issues, and of course the additional burden of tuition. So on one hand, I understand this as perhaps some sort of a welcome policy change. On the other hand, I also see this as a perhaps blunt instrument that's, potentially targeting good actors, public universities and colleges, and international students themselves. So feelings are a bit mixed.
What will be the impact, do you think, do you imagine it will have on those international students?
I was listening into your conversation with the minister before, and I think speaking from our own institutions, looking at the context in Ontario with universities like Queen's and York, amidst others that are going through, an austerity budget, this will impact revenues potentially very negatively. And we have to think about why, our great public institutions have and universities, whether private or public, are relying on international students so much, and partly that's because of a lack of government funding and a trend towards for-profit institutions in general, where tuition's really becoming the way that universities govern themselves. So this reliance on international students isn't, partly it's because universities need to stay afloat and need the revenue. So I could see this having some really negative ramifications on universities that have been good actors so far.
The other part of this is to stem the impact or the pressure on the housing market, which is tight for everybody. But students are fighting that they have no place to live, and are putting increased demand on that housing market as well. How do you see this as a solution to that? Does this get to a solution for the housing market, the housing crisis in BC?
I mean, honestly, we have to understand housing crises, not only globally, but in Canada, as being one of the most unaffordable countries to live in. And, all our major cities are going through these massive rises in price of housing. No, I don't think that just targeting international students and these caps are going to address that housing crisis. I think this has become a narrative. They're an easy group to blame. This trope of an unwanted group of migrants constantly comes up in our politics in the US and Canada and in Europe, world over. And I don't think this is the key to addressing our housing issues. Yeah, I understand there's some, in university towns and in places where there are many people all of a sudden that can create real difficulties in housing. But my major concern is how international students themselves are treated. It's not that, these people are coming to buy homes. They're actually living in overcrowded housing units with many, many people. And that, I think, is from the perspective of equity, that's where I'm really concerned. I think that the people that are suffering the most in insecure housing are at the same time in the rhetoric, nationally getting blamed for it. So that's my major concern with that.
And what do you worry will be the impact on international students then?
I think, in terms of the cap?
In terms of the cap itself and in terms of the discussion around this as being a solution to the housing crisis.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't buy it. I mean, I think that, I haven't seen the numbers myself, and if that is true, that there will be some relief, then perhaps good. Perhaps the international students that are coming here have better access to housing. But I think housing is such a complex issue, tied to the global economy, supply chains, the post-COVID era. There are some landlords that are turning their detached housing into many multiple, I wouldn't even call them units, but many multiple areas for students to live in together. So I think that really should be cracked down. But again, I think the way to it isn't necessarily just a cap on international students. And we don't know what the quotas are yet either. So I'm not entirely convinced, I'd say.
Ali Baggett is my guest, Assistant Professor of Race and Equity at SFU's School of Public Policy. He'll join us, continue to join us in our next half hour as well. We've been asking you for your thoughts on this, and Raj is joining us from the Comox Valley. Hi, Raj. Welcome.
Yeah. Hi there. Just hold on the line, please. Sorry.
Sure.
Give me 1 minute.
Oh,
Thank you.
shall we come back to you, Raj? Or
Yes, please.
okay. I'll put you on hold. I really want to hear what you have to say, having come to Canada as an international student 15 years ago. So we hope to connect with Raj in the Comox Valley in our next half hour. We are asking you as well, what do you think will be the impact of this limit on international students for 2 years? What impact might it have on post-secondary institutions? What impact might it have on housing, on the pressure on the healthcare system? If you're an international student yourself, if you have been one, we'd love to hear from you. What's been your experience? And what about this challenge of finding housing once you arrive to attend an educational institution here in BC? Love to hear from you. Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950. and 604-669-3733 in Metro Vancouver. That's the local number. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. If you'd like to email us your thoughts, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. We'll have more coverage on the federal government's announcement of a temporary cap on international students for 2 years. My guest, Ali Baggett, Assistant Professor of Race and Equity at Simon Fraser University's School of Public Policy. We'll go to your calls and more from our guest coming up in our next half hour, right after the CBC News Update with Zara Premji.
Good afternoon. Just before 3:30 this morning, Surrey RCMP were called to a fire in a residential suite of a commercial building. Surrey Fire were evacuating occupants of other suites and located a man in the suite. After life-saving efforts were performed, the 54-year-old did not survive. Officials say the fire was not suspicious. Abbotsford police have been called in by the They have rather called in the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team after a shooting death on the weekend. A 25-year-old man was gunned down Saturday in a parking lot on South Fraser Way. Police believe it was a targeted shooting. And Vancouver Coastal Health is warning the public to be aware of carbon monoxide poisoning as we head into the winter months. The health authority says hospitals in the region see an increase in poisonings during the colder season, with an average of 31 ER visits a month. It says homeowners should install carbon monoxide detectors and have your furnace checked annually. Now to the BC forecast. For the North Coast, wet and windy today. Temperature steady near a balmy 5 degrees. For the Peace region, a mix of sun and cloud, but that high is just sitting around -14. For the central interior, cloudy today and a high of -4. For the Boundary and Kootenay regions, you can expect a high near 3 degrees. For the Okanagan and southern interior, rain throughout the day, highs near 3. And for Metro Vancouver, Victoria and the Fraser Valley, we're in for a wet week. Rain today and the high sitting near 7. That's your CBC News from Vancouver.
I got caught in some rain yesterday myself. I saw the lovely snow, the remnants of the snowfall from last week, and thought, I'm going to go for a walk, put on those snow boots. And as I headed over, saw the rain come down, but I went anyway. Not a little weather won't stop me.
You mean you weren't checking in with our meteorologist or the apps or anything? You didn't know?
You know what? I was, and it said right there, rain at 3, but I thought perhaps they were wrong. No, they were not wrong.
No, don't question the weather gods,
This
Michelle.
is so true. What Darius says goes.
Exactly.
We found that out last week. Did you get out in the snow at all? Or?
You know what? Yeah, I trudged in the snow a fair bit this weekend. Not on purpose. I just kind of had to, and then it became slush. And then the next time I went out, it sort of felt like an ice rink. So we went out and got salt. We didn't think we'd need the salt anymore, but you do. Yeah.
Apparently so. It was quite icy, but there were a few people out on the trail.
Yes.
People with their dogs, someone running. And I just thought, oh my goodness, I'm very nervous for you. But
they need those claws under their shoes if they're doing that.
Exactly right. Fingers crossed. She looked okay. Zara, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Zara Premji in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. We're live on radio. If you're listening in at Bella Coola, we're at 91.1 FM, in Atlin, 90.1 FM. Live streaming as well on our website, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC News app. You can also catch us on YouTube. Just search for CBC Vancouver. And we continue our coverage now of the announcement from Ottawa today. Immigration Minister Mark Miller announcing a 2-year limit on international students, effectively reducing the number of international students coming into Canada by 35% from last year's number. So we're asking you, what do you think will be the impact of this temporary limit? And if you're an international student yourself, what has been your experience? The immigration minister saying this is a blunt measure that is aimed at protecting a system that has been open to abuse, and that it's one that is not aimed at international students themselves. And we're taking your calls along with my guest, Professor Ali Baggett at Simon Fraser University School of Public Policy. Let us know your thoughts on this. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And we had Raj on the line earlier from the Comox Valley. It sounds like we have lost our connection with him. He might have had to go and attend to something. We do have Richard in Victoria on the line. Hi, Richard.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What do you think of this policy?
A train wreck, a predictable train wreck. You know, this is the Liberal government looking for some low-hanging fruit. And it's ironic that the people that they're punishing here are people who are not voters. They're not people who can vote to support the Liberal Party, and which is, I'm sure, is a big part of why they're targeted. This is a group that brings revenue into Canada. This is a group, we all see them. They're at the library studying, or they're in a coffee shop studying, minding their own business, learning. Yet this is just a convenient distraction for the Liberal government from their massive, failed and problematic policies around immigration in general. These students they're studying. They're not blocking bridges and roads. They're not, it's really.
How then do you think that the issues around housing, for example, what would be a better way, in your view, of tackling that?
Well, you know what, Michelle, I don't mean to sound arrogant, but it's not rocket science. It's a matter of numbers. Housing needs to increase, and immigration overall needs to be scaled back at least a little bit. I'm not one of these people saying just make it zero for a few years, and we can't. That's not practical or realistic. But it needs some significant curtailing, not targeting, the least problematic group of all our immigrants, permanent, temporary, and students. It's just curtail it significantly, and at the same time keep trying to ramp up the housing. But this is just a really lazy, low-hanging fruit attack on a group that does not carry a vote. And
Richard, thank you very much. No, I take your point. You didn't sound arrogant. Thanks so much for the call. And that's Richard in Victoria. Mary is on next now from Kelowna. Hi, Mary. Hi there, Mary. Can you hear me? Okay, we'll try to connect with Mary in Kelowna. Let's go back to Professor Baggett. What do you make of that? Can we talk about the politics of this? What Richard was talking about, this is low-hanging fruit in terms of trying to make a dent in the housing crisis. There has been a lot of conversation of late around the levels of immigration that the Liberal government is aiming for without sufficient housing to go on par with that increase.
I mean, I think I completely agree that this is a group that's being unfairly targeted. I agree with Richard on that level. I don't really agree with the comments on immigration in general. I don't know if we can kind of argue that some immigrants are better than others, which was partly what I got over there. You know what? There was an RBC report recently that suggested that even the kind of 1.3% increase of immigration in Canada, it's not going to be enough for our future long-term growth, especially with regard to our aid structure in this country. So I think if we're thinking about long-term growth, securing a tax base, our pensions, et cetera, immigration has to go up. This is just from the perspective of Canada as a nation, has to go up to about 2.1%. Now, I will take the point, though, however, that many immigrants come here and cannot afford housing and other basic costs of living, like many other Canadians in this moment. So that's where I think we need to really focus our attention on. And, there's no one size fits all model. I don't think housing is actually a no-brainer. I don't think, just building more units and they'll come is sort of the strategy that'll work. I think we need stronger commitments to social housing. And yeah, I think the politics around immigration are really starting to get tough. Because Canadians are in a moment of heightened economic insecurity, immigrants again come up as the first group of people that are undeserving of sharing in, our national project, whatever we speak. So I'm very wary of, anti-immigrant sentiment that gets baked into the things that we say every day.
Okay, thank you very much for that as well. Raj is back now from the Comox Valley. Hi, Raj.
Hi there.
Hi there. Go ahead, please.
So I was an international student 15 years ago. I came to Canada as an international student to pursue my MBA. And I think the decision made by the federal government is a great move because we are not just stopping the international student. We are putting a cap because with the current circumstances, with the housing and how they are abused and vulnerable from each and every sector of our community is totally saddening. Like to have living in the housing, that's not what Canada promises. Nobody in Canada should be living, 20 people in one bedroom or something like that, or basement, or abused by the worker, or just in general because they are so overflow. So while we are fixing the system, I think this is a great move, and it's not targeting anybody. At first and foremost, we have to prioritize Canadians, who are taxpayers, who are living in this country. We owe to them, then we worry about the rest of the world. That is our top. Then first we fix our backyard, then we're going to fix the rest of the world.
Raj, I'm glad you were able to join us. Thank you so much for your call.
Yeah.
Take care. That's Raj joining us from the Comox Valley. I just want to hear a little bit as well from someone who was on Rosemary Barton Live this past weekend on this, and this is talking about the impact on post-secondary institutions. Sandy McDonald is president of Holland College in Charlottetown, and he told Rosemary Barton on CBC that he's concerned about that cut in the number of student permits.
We have about 750 students from outside Canada They come from all over the world. Our top countries would be India, Nigeria, Tibet, Mexico, and those types of countries. They impact the college and the city in four broad ways. First, the revenues, of course, our regular tuition per year is about $5,000. Our international students pay about $10,000, so it's still probably one of the better deals in Atlantic Canada. But the students also enable us to offer as many as 65 programs. Without international students, our domestic students wouldn't have the same breadth and depth of programming we can offer.
Right.
They've also had a significant impact on our culture of our school. Our own students here from PEI, Atlantic Region Canada, have a broader and deeper understanding of what the rest of the world looks like now because of them.
Right.
And last, and perhaps importantly in many ways, is that our international students support the local economy. There's very few industries, retail, service, hospitality, that don't avail themselves of our international students. So they make a large contribution to the city and the college in many ways.
What do you think makes sense to deal with this problem?
I think it makes sense to ask the individual institutions, can you rationalize the reason why you have X number of students in your community or in your college or in your university? We have a self-imposed cap here at Holland College of about 30% of our students, because we feel that's the number that we can adequately support, and that support means in terms of teaching and housing and part-time employment and those things. So we don't want to go much further than that because we don't know if our community can support those.
I think that is obviously part of the problem, right? Is that schools are taking on so many students that the community can't support them. And I wonder whether you think institutions should have to be, have the number of international students tied to the kind of housing it can provide.
I think not only housing, Rosemary, I think housing is essential, but I also think in terms of part-time employment, transportation, healthcare, those types of things as well.
Yeah.
So I think if you're going to take in 30, 40, 20, whatever percentage it would be, that you were able to rationalize that to the federal government that yes, we indeed can support this number of students in our community.
That's Sandy McDonald, president of Holland College in Charlottetown. Let me go back to my guest and wrap up here. Professor Ali Baggett at SFU, you touched on your concerns around this conversation around immigration and housing. So what will you be watching for then as this 2-year limit is being put in place? What will you be watching for to ensure that there is no scapegoating of, in this case, international students and immigrants in general?
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely be watching for, first of all, how the quota of these numbers are allocated, whether public institutions and our important institutions are protected in this. And what strikes me with Raj's comment earlier, this idea of, fix our own backyard, I think what people need to realize is that international students benefit us, our institutions, our universities, our local economies, and we still deal with labor shortages. Unfortunately, international students are doing the most low-paid work. Retail sectors, etc., transport will struggle if there's a severe cap. And that's not to say that people should be filing into this type of work, but it's as a nation we are using these groups. It's not this is quote unquote fixing our own backyard. This isn't some benevolent policy, really. I mean, this is how Canada can secure its future. So we need to keep that in mind. This is what it's for. And I think what I'll be really concerned about is where our rhetoric around immigration goes forward, particularly with this upcoming federal election. And I will say I'm nervous. I'm nervous and anxious about the discourse in Canada today.
It's very good to speak with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Likewise, thanks so much.
Ali Baggett is an assistant professor of race and equity at Simon Fraser University's School of Public Policy. (12:46, 1:46 in the Mountain Time Zone). Well, something A little dreamy to leave you with today. Have you ever dreamed of riding a bike through a countryside in France or in Vietnam? My next guest has had plenty of those experiences and many stories to share. We're asking you as well, if you want to call us, have you toured through a city or another country by bike? You can let us know and share your memories. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone as well. And you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And Robin McKinney is an adventure traveler and founder of Great Explorations Bike Tours. This Wednesday evening in Vancouver, he's giving a talk and slideshow of his travels. That's at Studio 16 on West 7th. And net proceeds go to the Greater Vancouver Food Bank. Robin McKinney is with me now in studio. Hello.
Hello.
Very nice to have you. And we have some photos here of your trips that we're showing just behind me. Just gorgeous. You on a bike in Catalonia, in Tuscany as well, in Chile. You with several of your cohorts. I mean, just riding through fields and fields. Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How would you describe the magic? Like, what's that experience like for you?
Well, I think anyone that's ridden their bicycle knows the joy from just having the wind in your hair and you're outside. You're experiencing a road or a region in a way that is invigorating. You know, and the way you're greeted by people is obviously different as well compared to being in a bus or driving past them.
What's that like? What is the greeting?
Well, it's they're welcoming and they're curious. You know, in places like Myanmar or Morocco, they don't see people riding in the distances we do and the way we do. So they are curious and they're asking questions, and they're also often proud of where they're from, and they want to show you and tell you about things that they know will be interesting to us.
What was it that got you into bike touring in the first place?
Well, I've always been a cyclist, and I guess when I was in my early 20s, I just finished a French immersion at Trois Pistoles, and I was heading to France for 6 months, so I had a bicycle with me, and I landed and just cycled for months throughout Europe, and I met someone who was a guide and led tours, and I said, "Wow, that sounds pretty cool. You actually get paid?" And they said, "Yeah, you can do this, and you can go, all these countries." And so I started that in 1983, and then for 16 years I did that for a company. They flew me around the world to do it, and then in 1996 I started Great Explorations. So yeah, we're in about 26 countries, but I also did lots of independent trips in places for months and months. 5,000 kilometer journey through Asia and Africa, and yeah.
What is the planning like for that?
Well, it is, daunting to some, I guess, because I've been doing it for so long. I kind of have a bit of a formula, where we obviously look at resources. We talk to locals. Often I just go by myself, though. Like when I went to Vietnam the first time, I had the Lonely Planet guidebook to cycling Vietnam. It suggested that riding from Hanoi to Saigon along Highway 1 would be the logical route. I did that, but I realized that that's not ideal for a lot of people because it's, busy and traffic and loud. And so the good news is there's lots of great riding in Vietnam, but I went and found those places. And in the old days, you didn't have the resources we do today, like GPS and stuff. So it was going there in person, and I still do that.
Oh, gorgeous. And what about physically? How do you prepare for something like that?
Well, I'm just generally active, but people who do our trips or tour in this way, as long as they're generally active, they're going to be okay. The distances are not daunting, and most of the trips we run at other companies is 40 to 60 kilometers a day. So that's usually 3 to 4 hours of pedaling.
That's nothing. Not for me. But I get it. If this is something that you do anyway, why not explore?
Yeah, I'm back from 2 months of trips. I did 6-7 trips back to back, and so I cycled every day for 60 days, and it just becomes, it just feels like the right thing to do. Get out on your bike and ride, and then go enjoy the pool or walk the towns. And,
meet some people and enjoy the wind in your hair, as you just said. My guest is Robin McKinney, the founder of Great Explorations Bike Tours. He's giving a talk and slideshow. It's called Soiree and Slideshow, Great Bike Journeys of the World. That's this Wednesday night at Studio 16 in Vancouver. We're asking you if you've experienced touring a city or another country by bike. And you can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Greg is calling from Courtney. Hello there, Greg.
Hi there. How are you?
I am well. Have you been on a trip like this?
Yes, I called in because you triggered something in my memory, talking about bicycle touring. Back in 1979 and 80, I took a bicycle over to Europe, a 10-speed bicycle, and I traveled through, starting in the UK and across European countries. All told, the trip was over a year. It was 14 months, I think. And
Wow.
well, I wasn't riding the bike all the time. I would sort of, ride and then stop somewhere and work or what have you.
Okay.
But it was an amazing trip, and I highly recommend it. But it also was a life-changing event for me too, because when I was working at one of the spots that I stopped at, which was up in the Italian Alps in a kind of a remote ski resort, I wound up meeting my wife, who was a local there, and we worked the season together. And we're still married with 4 adult kids and 6 grandchildren and all that. So.
Oh my goodness! Wow, this was a pivotal trip for you then.
It absolutely was, in many ways, a life-changing trip.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was so? You said you called it magnificent. What was magnificent about it?
Well, easy answer. It's the way that a person is immersed in the travel, much more so than when you're in a train or in a car or on a tour bus or something like that. I'm not disparaging that at all. But when one's on a bicycle, you just sort of feel and take in all of it, the smells, the atmosphere. Riding through France, for example, I would love to, kind of just shout out "Bonjour, Madame" to the woman in the field, or stop at a butcher and pick up a local sausage and eat that for my dinner that night. I don't know, it was more hands-on, more sort of immersive, more really experiencing it. And I met a lot of wonderful people, and I had a lot of really great experiences. Not all of them great, but just think about travel, right?
It was a whole year, so
yeah, that's right. Yeah, some up and some down, but no, it's really challenging, and it's not always easy. But man, the rewards are magnificent. They're really worth it. So, yeah.
Well, I'm glad we triggered that memory for you, Greg. Thank you very much for sharing it.
You're very welcome.
Bye. That's Greg in Courtney. What did you think of his story? A whole year, but of course, we're stopping here and there.
Yeah, sounds like a great adventure. And he captures, like, even getting us off our devices for a time. It's hard to ride your bike and be on your phone. So that kind of forces, yourselves or your children in our case. We took ours when they were quite young, 8 and 10, and went off the Loire Valley and subsequently other trips, and just getting them off their phones and with other kids or people riding. They're fantastic memories.
Chris is up next in Delta. Hi, Chris. Have you been on a bike trip? Yeah, hi.
Yeah. Back in 2012, I was a chef at the London Olympics.
In 2012?
In 2012 in Stratford. And I went to a flea market, and I bought myself a bicycle for £10. And I saw all of Greater London from a 10-pound bicycle.
And it held up, did it?
It held until the very last day.
Oh, really?
And the very last day, when I had to come back, I chained it to a fence with the key, and I put a sign on it, free bike, and maybe someone picked it up, and it was giving out at the very end. The pedals were coming off, and it was starting to fall apart, but it got me there, and it got me to work every day as well.
Wow!
And I went all over London and Greenwich and the south side and the north side, and the Isle of Dogs. But when you're on a bicycle, you can get, especially those old cities in Europe, you can get into areas where you just can't go by car because those little alleys are just too narrow for cars. And I saw things that many of the locals didn't know about. And and doing it from bicycle, you're fairly fast. You can cover a lot of ground in one day.
Yeah.
So it's better than being on foot. But it was an awesome experience. I would highly recommend it.
I'm sure that added to the romance of working as a chef at the London Olympics.
Absolutely.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah,
Chris,
it was quite the experience.
So great to hear from you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's Chris in Delta. Tell us about what's happening Wednesday.
Well, it's a slideshow I call Great Bike Journeys of the World. So I just returned, as I said, from I was in Provence and Puglia and Catalonia and Mallorca and Turkey. And so, it'll be a slideshow, and there's video and pictures and stories from really a lifetime of travel. So I've been doing this for so long. I've got a few good stories, I think.
Yes. What's a short one you'd like to share?
Oh, I guess I was in Morocco. I was in Marrakesh. I picked up a coffee table book of some riads there, which are the palaces, and there was a spread on a guy named Bill Willis, an American architect living in Marrakesh, and he designed a lot of the palaces and riads. And so I read his bio, and it said that he'd been to the Graduate School of Architecture at Columbia University, and I did as well. I'm a graduate there. So I contacted him. I said, Bill, I'm in Marrakesh. I'm with a group of Americans. We're going to a restaurant called Yakut that you designed. Could we possibly come to your riad and maybe have a drink before dinner? And he said, of course you can. So we drove over. Bill welcomed us into this, to this day, probably one of the most fantastic riads or palaces I've ever seen. And it was just one of those times where, you know, he told us about life for him there and Marrakesh and then we headed off to dinner. And so, you know, I'm not shy.
You can be if you're going out there saying bonjour to everybody while you're on your bike. I'm sure there are many, many more stories in store on Wednesday. And thank you for these wonderful photos you've shared with us.
Okay, very welcome.
That's Robin McKinney, founder of Great Explorations Bike Tours. And that event is Soiree and Slideshow, Great Bike Journeys of the World, Wednesday at Studio 16 in Vancouver. And net proceeds go to the Greater Vancouver Food Bank. You can go to Eventbrite for tickets. That's our show for today. And in a couple of minutes, TransLink's CEO will hold a news conference, and the union as well providing an update on that Metro Vancouver transit strike. Much more coming on the transit strike as well in Metro Vancouver. The Labour Minister will speak about all of this at 3 o'clock. So at 2 o'clock, the union and TransLink CEO. At 3 o'clock, BC's Labour Minister. Much more coverage of that transit strike affecting buses and C-bus service in Metro Vancouver for today. Stay tuned for that. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.